Good morning, everybody. Today we're going to talk about purchases, specifically setting up purchase orders for your vendors, how to send them out, how to receive inventory once it's received actually physically into the system, and everything like that. So to get started, let's go up to Purchases, Orders, Inventory, and we will start setting up a new purchase order for a vendor. So when you come into the purchase order screen, it is going to pre-populate with the last purchase order that you did work on. So of course it populated with PO number 9. To create a new one, I'm just going to go ahead and click New. I'm going to select my vendor that I'm creating the purchase order for. So let's say Lippman Produce, and click OK. So a couple of things before I get into the process area, just to show you exactly what's happened. First of all, of course, it's selected my vendor. It has created a purchase order number for you. So Edible does keep track of its own purchase order numbers. It's creating those for you, and it is just incrementing by one. If you start a purchase order and you do not finish it, maybe if I started this and I canceled, then that purchase order number is used. So it is a use it or lose it situation. You can come back to this purchase order and edit it to reuse it, but it is a purchase order number for this vendor initially. Some of the header information, all this header information up top, we have a buyer that you can assign to the purchase order itself. You have Incoterms to specify whether this is delivered or a pickup order. The scheduled delivery date is when you expect to receive this inventory. Depending on your settings, you may have this pre-populated based on so many days from today's date, or you may choose to enter it in manually. Whatever the case is, you can go ahead and set this up. This does control when inventory is expected to be received. So if you, say, are allocating to open purchase orders, it's not going to show as available until the scheduled delivery date. And then, of course, that will update based on when you physically receive it. But for allocating to open purchase orders, this is a very important date. The confirmed delivery date is completely up to you. It's basically confirming with your vendor when you expect to receive this inventory. The load ID is a way to link multiple purchase orders to the same number. So if you are receiving multiple purchases on the same load or the same truck, you can generate a load ID just by clicking the load ID button, and that's just going to increment by one, just like the purchase order number. Or you can go ahead and manually write in a load ID. So you have free form to enter in whatever you want. Once it is entered and saved, then you can access that same load ID for another purchase order. So I can link all of my purchases to load number 1 if I wanted to. And then I can enter in a load note if I want to. That is this icon right next to the load ID. So once I've generated my load IDs, I can pick whichever one I need to for further purchase orders. Reference number, very similar idea. You can go ahead and enter in a reference number and link multiple purchase orders to the same reference number. This is more for lookup purposes. So when you're looking up purchase orders, you can look up by the reference number. So essentially that is all that is, but it acts the exact same way as the load ID. The pickup address. So you can, if you have alternate pickup addresses entered under the vendor master file, then you can go ahead and select the pickup address that you are picking up from, if this is of course a pickup purchase order. If you don't have any entered in, or if you did not specify in here, it is going towards the initial address in the vendor master file, that details tab. Of course, you can edit and create a pickup address right here in the screen. So if I wanted to, I can go ahead and enter in an address. And so on and so forth. So city, state, zip, all of that good information. And I can even set this as a default pickup. So this will actually update my vendor master file once I save. The order notes that you can enter in, these are basic purchase order notes. So you can go ahead and enter in the order notes and they will print on the purchase order document under the line item details. The receiver notes are printed on the receiver card, but act the very same way. It's just a standalone note on the document itself underneath the line items. Of course, if you do have multiple warehouses, you will want to go ahead and set up which warehouse you're receiving into. So it will pre-populate with the system default warehouse or the user default warehouse if users are set with default warehouses. But you can specify which one you are going to receive into by clicking on this dropdown. All right, and so that's the main header information. Of course, we do have some other information like the issued information. This is basically just updating with who created the purchase order, when it was last modified and who modified it, and if there was a truck ID signed in shipping information. Shipping information we'll get to in just a bit. The other thing that I didn't talk about is the consignment checkbox. If you are purchasing on consignment, this is pretty much the first step in assigning this as a consignment order and basically kickstarting the consignment process. We're not going to talk about that today. That's going to be its own training, is the consignment process. So I'm just going to leave that unchecked for today. So moving forward, that's just the header information. So basically, after I click new and select my vendor, all this information is populated. I can update it as needed. But now I can go ahead and start adding my items that I want to purchase. And there's 3 different ways to add items to a purchase order. There is the F2 option, so F2 on your keyboard or down here. This is going to pull up your item list. And of course, you can look up by description, by item code. So very similar to some of the other screens that we've looked at. You can go ahead and type in an item code that you want to go ahead and add or pick by description. Once you select a column header and you type in the to contain field, it will start looking up by that description or by whatever you're looking for. So let's say if I type in CIL, it will look up my cilantro items. So I can go ahead and select that. Of course, if you are working in the item list, you can select multiple items just by selecting the first one. And if you see another one that you want to go ahead and add, you can go ahead and add another one just by holding down the control key on your keyboard. Now, some of you may already have what we call vendor standard items. So those vendor standard items are entered in the vendor master file under the specification tab. Now, I don't have vendor specific items for this vendor, and I know that because they did not pre-populate in the purchase order. But just to show you, this is the item specification tab. Any items that are entered in this screen and marked as standard on the left side are going to pre-populate into the purchase order screen. So that is behavior by design. When something is added to that list and marked as standard, they will pre-populate. It's a way to make it easier for you. So if you do purchase the same items every single time, you don't have to keep adding items. You can just select through the list of pre-populated items and start adding quantities. However, if you need to add more items to it, you can always add more items. You're not stuck to just the vendor standard items. The second option to add items is the Shift F2 option. So the Shift F2 option brings up those vendor standard items. That's another reason why I wanted to show you that screen. Right now I have nothing to select. I don't have any items in that vendor spec list. But if I click that Shift F2 option, it would bring up what looks like the item selection screen, but only list items that are in that vendor spec list. Whether they're marked as standard or not, they will appear and I can just choose from that list. The other option, of course, is F3, so just a blank line. If I wanted to just add items, I know my item codes really, really well, I can just go ahead and hit F3 and type in my item code. If I don't know my item codes really well, I can also utilize this as a straight lookup. So if I don't want to have to open up the entire item selection screen, and I just wanted to start typing in a description, I can go ahead and say hot. And as I start typing in, it will pull up this and start filtering based on what I've typed in. So I can see, okay, here's my hot sausage, VAC 12 So I'm going to go ahead and add that item. Once the items you need are added into the screen, all you have to do from here is put in the quantity that you want. So let's say 10 here. I'm going to say 5 here and 6 here. I can change the units of measure if I want to. So if I'm not purchasing by the case, or if I'm purchasing by the each or anything like that, I can go ahead and update that. And then if I have an estimated cost, I can go ahead and manually enter that in. Your estimated cost, depending on your settings, might be pre-populating with something. More often than not, it's based off of the last purchase cost for this vendor and item. So that might be pre-populating for you. But you always have the ability to overwrite if needed. So I'm going to go ahead and say $5 per half, $10 per, actually it's $3 per pound. This is a catch weight item. Anytime you see that pink is indicating that this is a variable weight item. So always pay attention to the estimated cost. Anytime you're working with catch weight items, they are priced by the pound. So I'm going to say it's $3 per pound here, and then let's go $10 a case for the sausage. Now notice I left this item 0 because I realized, oh, I added that by mistake, or maybe it was a standard item and it uploaded and I just don't need it. I can go ahead and delete all those items, but if you have multiple items that you don't need in this list, it would take a little time to delete every single one by hand. By the way, to delete manually is F12 down at the bottom or on your keyboard. But if I just leave it at 0, all I have to do is save. And as long as I have an order quantity, it will save that item. Anything with a 0 order quantity will automatically be taken out of my order once I save. Other things to know about the purchase order screen in general is you can move columns around, and they are user remembered. So let's say I don't want to have this label in front of everything. I want to go straight to my order quantity. So I'm going to go ahead and move that over in front of that lot number field, or behind that lot number field, whatever. All right, so you can move columns around as needed. Per user, it will be saved. So that is generally how to set up a purchase order. So very straightforward. You add your items, you enter in your quantities, costs if you have them, and then you can go ahead and save. From here, we can go ahead and print or email the purchase order over to the vendor. I do have a copy of it listed here, just so you can see. This is our very basic purchase order. In the print screen, you will see that there are some options to update or change this purchase order. So if you wanted to print the cost, if you wanted to print associated add-ons, which we'll get to in just a bit, whether you want to print line notes, you can go ahead and do that. And again, you can go ahead and send this via email to the vendor as long as your email settings are set up and your vendor has a valid email address entered into the system. Some other things that I didn't discuss in here. So this is a purchase order draft, essentially. I can change this however I need to. I can update my quantities. I can add items, delete items. Nothing has happened as far as my general ledger or my inventory. So I can come in, click edit, and do whatever I need to. A couple of notes. Once I have saved the purchase order number, a lot number is created. Now, it's not available in the system yet, but the lot number itself is used. So the lot number that is generated is based on the PO number and the line number. So here I can see this is my PO number 11 and my line number 1, and that is the lot number for this item. The lot number, of course, is how we track everything in Edible software. So when I'm looking up by lot, I can see what the item is, who the vendor was that I purchased from, the date that it was received, a lot of this other information like label, which is a free form field where you can type whatever you need to in, my received weight, hash number, which not too many people use, country of origin, all of that information can be tracked by that one lot number. Now, If you do work with your own lot numbers, if perhaps you are receiving and you wanted to specify a specific lot number for a warehouse that you are holding your inventory in, perfectly fine. There is a system setting that allows you to change that lot number at the time of receiving. So I do not have that enabled right now, but just so you know, that is an option that you do have. Another option is putting lots on hold. So if this lot, maybe there is something amiss about it, maybe we're not sure if we want to keep it or anything like that, instead of deleting it, we can just mark it on hold. It will still be received into the system, but it cannot be used in any transaction until I come in and I actually take it off hold. Now I can do that in here in the receiving screen or in this inventory unhold lot screen. But those are the main columns to worry about, the order quantity, the estimated cost. If you are working with pallets and you wanted to go ahead and enter in a number of pallets being received for your item, you can go ahead and do that down here. So if we put in a number of pallets or a number of units on a pallet, I'll go ahead and say 5 here. Then I know because I'm ordering 10 halves, I've got 2 pallets. So as long as you have entered in pallet configuration here, you can also print pallet labels. So go ahead and save that for a sec. And so this print labels option, if you are printing labels from the system, you can go ahead and print them at this point as well, or at the time of receiving. Just to give you an example of what those labels look like, I've got a pallet label. This is an example of a pallet label. It does give you the information for the item. If you have a UPC that you entered into the item master, it will show you here. And then we have a GS1 barcode that not only has the item, but it has the number of units on that pallet and the lot number itself. And then this is what we call the master count label. This is just for the cases itself. So you don't have to enter in anything special for a master count label. It's based on the order quantity. So again, we have our UPC, we have our GS1, and then of course your item information. All right. A couple of other options that you have in the purchase order screen that maybe you haven't worked with before. Set in reference to sales order. So if you have a sales order already created in the system for one of these items or all of these items, you can actually set that, you can actually set this order in reference to that sales order. Now, right now I don't have anything set up, but essentially what would happen is if you clicked on that drop down, you'd be able to select that sales order. It would list out any sales orders with those items, and it would go ahead and list that customer here. And you can mark it as a drop ship if you wanted to as well. So it's essentially doing the generate purchase order option from the sales order screen that we looked at, but in reverse. Now, on the other hand, I could also generate a sales order if one didn't already exist. So if I created this purchase order to satisfy a customer demand, but I hadn't set up the sales order yet, then all I have to do is click this generate sales order button. Oh, and that's a good note there. The catch weight items do not allow me to generate a sales order. So you cannot do this for catch weight items. You can only do it for regular or net weight items. But essentially what the generate sales order does is it would select your customer. And once you've selected your customer and hit generate sales order, and you would choose your delivery date as well, it would go ahead and open up the sales order and show you the new sales order invoice that you've created. And it would have these items listed with their order quantities and their prices, their calculated prices. So that's pretty much the generate sales order button. It just allows you to generate a sales order off of something that you plan on receiving. Print history, we do have a print history button down here as well as down here, your F4 option. All that does is shows you your print history for this particular purchase order. So if you printed labels, if you printed the purchase order document, if you printed a receiving card, it will give you a date and time stamp and what user printed it. So that's pretty much all that information is. It just tells you who printed what when. The add attachment option, we do have an add attachment option for the PO itself or for the line items as well. All it is if you have a picture maybe of the item or maybe of a particular document that the vendor sent or anything like that, you can go ahead and click that add attachment button or this add button. And this will just bring up a browser window where you can select a file from your local computer, and you can add that file into the purchase order. And that's basically all it is. So if you wanted to review those pictures or review those attachments, you can just open up that add attachment or add button again, click on that attachment that you've added, and click open document. Something else is the notes field. So, and I apologize, I didn't talk about this. So we talked about the order notes, and the received notes are just standalone notes underneath the entire item list. However, if I did have notes for particular items, I could go ahead and add them in this notes field. So the note for the particular item itself, I can go ahead and type that in, and that would print on the purchase order right underneath the item itself. So anytime you see a note field highlighted in blue, we know that there is a note existing for that item. The shipping information. The shipping information allows you to enter in certain information for this particular purchase order. Some people do use this, others do not use this, so it just depends on what information you need. Of course, I'm not in edit mode right now, so I can't add anything in here, so let's go ahead and click edit and type in shipping. Oh, and I apologize, so I had to be in edit mode to set in reference to as well, so I'll let you see that in just a second. But I can set up information like domestic carrier, international carrier. If you've used it before, again, it stores it for you, just like the load ID and the reference. I can go ahead and enter in that load ID in here, that truck ID I was talking about, manifest, all this good information. If you are importing or anything like that, you can add this information in here. So I'm going to go ahead and just click cancel. So again, if this is good information for you, you have this at your disposal, and we keep that information tied to the purchase order. So the set in reference to, so there's nothing to select. Like I said, I don't have any sales orders right now, but you can see I can click on that drop down now, and if a sales order did exist with these items, I could go ahead and select that. And the reset button, if you're already set in reference to a sales order, you can reset, and it'll basically just clear that reference. If you are wondering what the set in reference option does, it basically allows you to pre-allocate based on this purchase order. So as long as this purchase order is received before this invoice number up here, then once you receive it, it's automatically committed. So that's all that does. All right. A couple of other options that you have in here. You can open up the item display screen. So if I click Shift F11 down here, I can see my item display screen. And if I go ahead and click on a different item within the purchase order screen itself, so I can have these both open at the same time. And if I click on another item, it will go ahead and update what item I'm looking at in the item display. So the item display, of course, just shows you what's happening as far as this item itself in the entire database. So it's not specific to this lot or anything. I can see it down here, what's due in, what I currently have, any open purchase orders that are needing this item, and all of my sales history. But we'll revisit that screen a little bit more when we get into inventory. Some other options that you have, F5, the cost detail button. So the cost detail button allows you to see the cost that is making up this line item cost. So right now I only have inventory. One thing that I'm hoping to get to today, if not today, we will get to next week, is add-on POs. So if you have any add-on POs or non-inventory charges tied to this item, it will also show all of you those under here. So this will show you not only the inventory cost, but any other costs feeding into the actual cost of this item. So very good screen to see, and it also will show you if an invoice or a payable invoice has been created for this line item. So if I can't change certain information for this item, it's a good bet that I have an invoice number already created for it. Other options, F6 is just a hot button to click a new PO, so that will bring up that vendor list for you. Retrieve PO or F7 is a good way to look up purchase orders that you have been working on. Maybe you want to look up old purchase orders that you had created initially. Maybe you want to look up a current PO that you're working on. Whatever the case is, if you hit F7, you can go ahead and look up by that PO number. So if I type in a PO number, I don't have to type in the leading zeros. I just type in the PO number, click OK. And here I can see I have this PO number. It was received. It was assigned to this invoice, or it was referenced to this sales order. And I can look up whatever information I want to from there. Let me go back to what we're working on. I'm going to skip the add-ons for right now. F9 just takes me straight to the receiving screen. So it will take us directly to that receiving screen with this purchase order selected. I'm going to skip that for just right now because we are going to be getting there in just a second. F11 allows you to see what's happening with this item, again, in the database. So it's kind of like the item display, but shows you a little bit more detail right off the bat. Based on the warehouse, I can see the summary for this item. I can see purchase orders due in. Okay, here's my Lippman produce. Any orders that this item is on that are not, that are still open, or I'm sorry, delivered and unbilled. My on hand currently, my allocated amounts for sales orders, my on hand available, which is basically what is physically in my warehouse, and any unallocated sales orders that I may have for it. So this is essentially what we call our flash screen. So again, that was F11. Again, F12 is for you to manually delete an item. Shift F11 is that item display we talked about. Control F11 is your vendor details, so that will open up the vendor master file. And that's just going to show you information about this vendor. So here are my details. So this is the address that I'm currently picking up from, unless I added in a pickup address. Here are the pickup addresses, the alternate pickup addresses. So here is the address that I'm actually picking up from. And if it is marked as default, I am picking that up. We will get to more about this screen later on. But one thing I definitely want to visit is the recurrent add-on PO. So the recurrent add-on PO is an area where I can set up standard add-ons for a vendor. Every time I order from this vendor, I have to create an add-on PO for them. So we're going to actually revisit this once I get back into discussing add-ons more detail, but we will be revisiting that screen. The Shift F12 option shows you transactions that this item might be allocated to already. So if I went ahead and set this order in reference to a sales order, I would see those allocations for those line items. So if any of these line items were pre-allocated to a sales order or to a transfer or anything like that, I would see that information in here. Okay. Market cost, if any of you work with market costs, you can select an item and actually update the market cost for that item in here. So I can see my current market cost for this item. If I wanted to go ahead and update the future market or the markup amount or percentage, I can go ahead and do that from here. So that just allows you to update your market costs item by item for this purchase order without having to go into the item cost screen. Scanned images we won't talk about today. That's for Edible Scan, which is a separate module. A couple other buttons up here. The Extract to New PO. that's very similar to the split order option for sales orders. If you have a purchase order that's fairly long, or whatever the case may be, and the vendor said, oh, I don't have that item right now, or maybe I can give that to you in a separate order. What you can do, instead of having to just delete this and create a new PO, you can go ahead and select, that's what this selection option is for. You can select that line item and hit extract to new PO. So it's telling you this will extract this item from this PO to a new one. So we'll click OK. And you can even order it from a different vendor. You can say, okay, well, I won't order it from you, but I'll get it from somebody else. I'm going to look as we're just going to get it on a separate order. So I'm going to choose the same vendor, click OK. And it'll tell you that the new PO was created for that line item. So I click yes. And if I go ahead and, it will go ahead and take me directly to the purchase order. So here I have my purchase order. And if I come back in here, I click close and refresh this screen, you can see it was taken out. So I have now moved that item over to a new purchase order. The copy PO option is really nice, again, if you have standard purchase orders, and I mean really standard purchase orders. So the standard items defaulting are nice, but if you have the same order every week from this vendor, then the copy PO option is for you. This allows you to create multiple purchase orders in the future. So let's go ahead and close that. And let's come back in here. But this allows you to create multiple purchase orders for the same vendor. Let me choose another one. 1 second. Request delivery dates. That's perfectly fine. Okay. So in here, I can set intervals. So I can even say, is this on a weekly basis that I receive this? So I can go ahead and set up to have this pre-populate to the next date if I wanted to. I can set up a transit time. So maybe I order that every week, but I have 2 days that I add on. So that will actually give me a more valid receive date. So if I wanted to set these up for the future, then all I have to do is click add line, add line, add line, add line, add line for the foreseeable future. And now it will create multiple purchase orders for the same vendor for these dates with these same items, same quantities, and same costs. So they're open purchase orders. You can go in, you can delete them, you can go ahead and update them as they are actually being sent out. But essentially, that is what this does. It just copies this standard PO for this vendor for the foreseeable future. Let me go ahead and delete a couple of lines, and I'll go ahead and create POs. So here I've got 2 purchase orders created, and they should be for Freshworks, for celery, and cilantro. So if I go ahead and hit select PO, so anytime I want to look up a new PO, I can either do that F7 option, or I can hit select PO on the right side. And when I select it, here is that copied PO, same quantity, same cost, everything like that. All right, so let's get to the receiving form. So we've set up our purchase order. We've gone through a lot of the options that you may or may not use. Just so you know, this export button does have to do specifically with EDI, so we're not going to talk about it today. And we do have a receiving card. So when you are ready to receive this item, which is about where we're going to go, you can print the receiving card, and the receiving card looks exactly like this. So it has your items, but it has some information that you may need to keep track of, such as temperature, transit temperature, trailer clean, anything like that. So it just gives you a couple of things that the receiver can mark down and make sure that everything was up to snuff. So I'm going to go ahead and come back in here. And let me get to the receiving screen. So again, I can get to the receiving screen directly from the purchase order screen. And I'm going to go and work with that purchase order we had earlier. So number 11. I'm going to go ahead and hit F9, and that will take me to the receiving screen from here. Now I can get to the receiving screen directly from the purchase orders menu. It's just the receiving inventory option, so the third from the top. And if this doesn't happen to be the right purchase order number, if I just wanted to get to the receiving screen, I can go and select another PO just by hitting select F7 on the right side, or F7 on my keyboard, of course. But once I have the correct purchase order, I can see my PO number, my vendor, everything looks good. I'm going to go ahead and click Edit. Oh, it looks like something is stuck on this particular purchase order. So yeah, let me go ahead and work with a different one. Let's go ahead and work with one of the ones I created. Okay. Click Edit. So here I have a scheduled date of 8/14, but as you can see, my receive date is 8/7. So the receive date will always default to today's date. So I can go ahead and mark this as received as of today, or if for some reason a purchase order was received yesterday, but it wasn't marked as received in the system, you can always backdate. So you can change the receive date if need be. However, you will not be able to receive in a future date. So you will not be able to say, okay, I'm going to mark this as received tomorrow. That will not work. You can only backdate or receive as of today. When I have counted all of my products, received it in, and I see, okay, I've received everything that I wanted to. Everything was correct. All I need to do then is click Receive All as Ordered. So when I clicked Receive All as Ordered, what that did is it copied this order quantity over to my received quantity. So this is telling me everything was correct, but I can still change things before I click Save. So before I actually receive it, I can still update a few things. Let's say the celery dice, I didn't actually receive all 20 of the 5-pound bags. I only received 18. So I hit 18. It will pop up a message. Depending on your settings, you can bypass this message. But if any of you back order, you can go ahead and specify a back order for the remaining 2 cases, or the remaining 2 5-pound bags. If I click yes, what that's going to do is it's going to receive my 18, but it's going to create a new line for that same item with the 2 5-pound bags at the same cost. So I can enter in my receiving date. So this is just punching it up to tomorrow, but I can go ahead and say I am going to receive it later on today. I just don't want it received with the 18th. So I go ahead and click OK. And when I click Save, that new line will show up. Now I do have another option in here as well. I do want to show you what it is like to receive catch weight items for those of you who do work with catch weight items. So I'm going to go ahead and add in a catch weight item. That is not one. Let's go ahead and do brisket. There we go. So let's say I ordered 10 cases, $2 a pound. So you can add items to the receiving screen. So maybe they sent you something extra, or maybe you forgot to add something onto the initial purchase order that you called in later on. So you can even add items to a purchase order from the receiving screen. When you are receiving a catch weight item, you have to enter in the weight. Again, it's a variable weight item. All of your information is based on the pound, essentially. So I have to specify, even if the calculated weight, the factor from the item master, is correct, I would still have to re-enter 180 pounds. If that is incorrect, or if I needed to say I ordered 180, but it came in at 182.65, I would do that. So just bear in mind, for anybody who is using variable weight items, these weights have to be entered in at the time of receiving. You saw they don't have to be entered in at the time of the creating of the purchase order, because we don't know what we actually have. But when we receive it, we have to know what we actually received. So from here, you can see the order quantity is 0 on this line right here. This is because I didn't have it in the initial purchase order. That's perfectly fine. All we really care about is the receipt quantity. I can still update other things. I can update my cost if needed. Again, depending on your settings, you can update lot numbers, receipt dates. You can add in information like the production date, the expiration date, consignment commission, again, we're going to talk about later on. You can put things on hold. You can put in your pallet configuration right in here. You can enter in more notes. A claim for an item is essentially just a claim note. So it's pretty much just a note that you can enter in for an item. If you have a claim on an item that you intend on sending back or anything like that, you can go ahead and put a note in on that lot. And the claim is just a note. And when you are working through the system, you can go ahead and change the claim status from open to closed. So as you have credited or as you have done what you needed to for this item, you can move that claim status from open to closed. So it's just a note that follows that lot through the system. I believe we do have a report for claims later on. We'll visit that at a later date. But other information that might show up, brands, vendor's lot number. If you have a vendor lot number that you want to enter in, you can do that. Vendor's item code. If there is a vendor item code, maybe in the spec screen, that might pre-populate, so you can have that showing up as well. Again, those attachments, everything like that. So that's basically it as far as the receiving screen. So once I'm done, and I know this is what I actually received for all of my items, and these are my costs, I'm going to go ahead and click Save. I'll click Yes, click OK. That message was basically saying I had an item with 0 quantity, so it was going to delete it. So here I can see all of the items I received. Here is that back order line for that celery dice. So even though I had a back order for this too, the 18 that did come in are marked as receipts. So as long as these are highlighted in red in this screen, we know these quantities are in the system. And then of course later on, once this celery is actually received, I can go ahead and pull up that order from the receiving inventory screen. Again, it looks at the last PO number that you were working on. I can click Edit, and I can go ahead and mark it as received. So again, I can click the Receive All as Ordered button, or I can manually write that in, whatever the case may be. Click Save, OK, and it was received. So that is basically the receiving screen. Very, very similar to the purchase order screen, just a little less information. Again, you can print those same labels we looked at earlier. You can add attachments, shipping information, so a lot of the same buttons. Receiving card. This print option over here is the print receiver listing report. And this is just going to give you information about this PO versus what was ordered versus what was received. To preview that really quickly, this is basically what that looks like. So it just shows you the PO number, quantity received, quantity ordered, and all of that good summary information. The HACCP button we will talk about later on. This is purely for anybody who is following or needs to add HACCP information for your items. Again, we still have the cost detail option, transaction, so a lot of the same buttons as we saw on the purchase order screen itself. One button that we do have here that's really nice for those of you who have the invoice in hand and want to go ahead and create that payable invoice in the system, we do have a hot button for Create Invoice. So when we click that, it will take us directly to the payable invoices screen. With this PO selected, all we basically have to do is make sure that the costs are correct and we have the invoice number and the invoice date entered, and we can save. So it makes that part a little bit easier. But otherwise, that is essentially it. So we have received that inventory. Now, if there was information that was incorrect, perhaps we received the wrong quantity, perhaps we received at the wrong cost, perhaps I need to put in another claim note or something like that. there is certain information that you can change directly in the receiving inventory screen. So even after a purchase order has been received, as long as a payable invoice has not been created for it, you can still edit certain information. You can come in and you can go ahead and change that receive date, change that production date, all of that information we talked about earlier. The only thing that you cannot change directly in the receiving screen is the receipt quantity. That is locked in on this screen. Basically, anything concerning your quantity, you cannot change. But if I needed to change something that was received, let's say I said I received 30 cases, but then we noticed, oh wait, we miscounted. It was actually 29. So we can go ahead and change that information, just not in here. If we need to change quantity, we would come up to purchases and adjust received PO inventory. So in this screen, it allows you to adjust a lot of the same information that we could in the receiving screen, but it allows you to adjust the received quantity as well. So I hit select F7 at the top, and it pulls up all of my purchase orders. I can go and select the one that I need to receive. So it's all my received purchase orders. I go ahead and double click on that purchase order, and I'm working line by line. So I'm not going to be updating every single item at the same time. I'm going to select the line that I want at the top. So we were talking about the cilantro item. I'll click edit, and it'll allow me to work on that item right then and there. So it won't allow me to select any other items while I'm in edit mode. But here, this revised area, I can go ahead and just enter in the amount that I actually received and click OK. Again, I can change some other information. I can change the cost in here. That's a little bit too much. I can change the consignment commission, receive date, expiration date, all that information. I can put a claim against it. But once I'm done, I can go ahead and click save. All right. The only reasons why you would not be able to change a quantity in this screen is if you tried to adjust something that was already sold. So if I had 18 received quantity and I sold 16 already and I tried to change this to 15, it would not allow me because what I have used conflicts with what I say I actually received. I can't sell more than what I received. So that would be a reason why you couldn't change it to where you need it to go. Or if you already sold it completely, you wouldn't have the ability to edit it. If, however, the other option or the other reason you may not be able to change information is if you see these items and their letters are in green, that's an indication that a payable invoice has been created for it. And if you see any of those, you will see that the edit button will be grayed out. So if you have a payable invoice created for a line item, you will not be able to edit it because that's been locked down. You have agreed this is the quantity that you received and this is the cost you're going to pay to the vendor. So those are the two reasons you probably would not be able to edit certain information for a PO. All right. Some other screens that I wanted to visit today, the receiving or the inventory receiving manager. Just to show you very quickly what this screen is, it allows you to look at multiple purchase orders at a time. So it's very, very nice in that respect. You can change your date range, so you can look up for a specific date range. You can include both open and received POs or anything between the two. So it can be used as a review screen or it can be used as an edit screen. So if I choose to include open POs and click refresh, this shows me all of my open purchase orders currently. So here I can see my open purchase orders. It will split out by load ID. So as you can see, number 11 is not between 10 and 12, and that is because it does split it into a different load ID. So if I had multiple orders under the same load, it would show me all of those linked under the same load, number 1. From here, I can go ahead and expand this purchase order to see the line items. I can go to the purchase order screen directly from here. So if I select this and go to the purchase order screen, I can do that. I can go directly to the receiving screen, the adjust PO screen. If I wanted to print the PO, I could do that. With these line items selected, I can go ahead and print labels. So let's say I only want to print one. It has updated that to printing only one label. I can print the receiving card, PO line details, anything like that. Since I was having issues with that one before, I'm going to go ahead and stick to number 10. And let's say I could even receive from this screen. So from here, if I click Edit, I can go ahead and enter in a received quantity for these items. So if I had multiple items or multiple orders opened up, I could actually receive for multiple orders. So when I click Save, if I have a received quantity entered in, I can go ahead and save it. Again, I can change the received UOM as well. But it went ahead and received those two purchase orders. I didn't have to go to the receiving screen. Now, obviously, as you can see, there is less information shown in this screen. So after you are done, if you wanted to review or maybe make some changes, you can go ahead and select that PO and go to the receiving PO screen. So here I can update some of that other information like the label, the lot, the production date and expiration date, anything like that. But if you are receiving multiple POs at a time and it makes it a little bit quicker for you, the receiving manager screen is really nice in that respect. All right, it does show you certain information like you can adjust in arrival time, time in, time out, receiving notes, anything like that. So there is other information that you can update. You can update the receiving date as well. Yep, so essentially that is other information that you can do in this screen. If you click the print screen, it is just like a lot of those grid screens that we looked at last week. When you print screen, it's basically just going to print exactly what you see here with these column headers and what information you have listed. All right. So that is basically what we wanted to get through today. We wanted to talk about setting up new purchase orders, receiving purchase orders into the system, how to adjust purchase orders after they have been received, and talk about the inventory receiving manager, which kind of does everything. So those are the screens I wanted to talk about today. Thank you, everybody who joined in. Again, we will be doing the same thing that we have been doing. If you have any questions, send them through the chat or email us, and we will go ahead and follow up with them for everybody. I will see you guys again later. Thank you again, and I hope you all have a great day.